What's going on, everybody? Nick Whalen and Alex Barutha here with you on the RotoWire Fantasy Basketball Podcast. We're brought to you, as always, by DraftKings Pick 6. Make sure you go check that out. I know we still got a couple weeks until opening night, but plenty of baseball playoffs, NFL offerings over at Pick 6. Been having a lot of fun playing on there these last few weeks, and obviously we'll be firing that up quite a bit once the season tips off. Alex, today we want to talk about high risk, high reward players who are either targeting or not targeting in drafts. Some interesting names to discuss there. We'll talk about some boring veterans as well. You always had to have like two or three of those guys on your roster. So we'll get into that as the show rolls along. But we did have a decent amount of NBA preseason action over the weekend. And, you know, as is the case for preseason in any sport, maybe not a ton to take away from these games. We actually have a game going on right now, Alex. For some reason, the Magic and Pelicans are playing on a Monday afternoon. I have not done the research to see if there's like a special circumstance for this. The game is in New Orleans. It's not some like international series. So yeah, hopefully you're able to get off work and catch that noon tip off down in New Orleans. But we saw the debut of Bronny James over the weekend. We saw the Lakers take on the Suns yesterday. We saw Karl Anthony Towns in uniform for the New York Knicks. Again, we want to be realistic about what the opening days of preseason ultimately mean for fantasy. But any takeaways specifically from yesterday's slate?
From yesterday's slate, I mean, it's hard to say. You did mention Karl Anthony Towns. I can't remember if
Yeah,
that game was yesterday or not.
it was.
Um, I thought they looked great. That Charlotte crowd, you could hear a pin drop in that arena,
Oh
by
yeah.
the way, which is not surprising for a Hornets preseason game. But I thought he looked great. I think their team makes a ton of sense. Miles McBride got out there and played some really nice minutes, and
Yep.
he's going to be even more crucial to their team now that DiVincenzo is in Minnesota.
Yeah, I mean, when you're trying to piece through, the minutes and whatnot for these games, like that's kind of what I look at is, most starters, you're seeing like 15 to 22 minutes tops. Like the Knicks basically played their starting five for about 13 to 15 minutes. We saw a little bit of an extended run for guys like Brandon Miller, Miles Bridges. They were in the low 20s. Good to see LaMelo Ball back out there. Took 10 threes in 19 minutes. So LaMelo back in full force. But yeah, try to piece through, some of these bench rotations. Someone like Miles McBride, I think is a great one to highlight. 22 points for him on 18 shots in 25 minutes. Like the Knicks are this very deep team. But I think shedding Dante DiVincenzo as part of the Randall Karl Anthony Towns swap, I mean, that frees up 25 to 30 guard minutes, essentially, depending on who's active on a given night. And I think they're going to be asking a lot of Miles McBride and probably more of Landry Shamet and campaign behind him.
Shamet came out firing, man. He was out
He
there
does.
firing away for a job.
Yeah.
But I mean, he was great. We gotta give him
Mhm.
credit. But yeah, I mean, even Tyler Kolek came in there and give him what I thought was some pretty decent minutes, and
Yep.
Campaign came in and was firing off shots. That's par for the course. But that's what we're talking about, right? Like they are gonna
Yep.
need, and this is when everyone's healthy. We're not talking about the games that OG Anunoby is gonna miss and Josh Hart probably ends up missing and everything like that.
Hornets did not have Mark Williams. Grant Williams also didn't play in this game, nor did Cody Martin. So maybe not a full look at the rotation, but they started Brandon Miller, Bridges, Nick Richards got the nod at center, 3 blocks for him in 20 minutes, by the way. And then Josh Green and LaMelo. Totally forgot Taj Gibson is on this roster,
Yeah.
and let alone playing preseason minutes, giving him a +8 in 9 minutes. We like that. Tijon Salon, Alex, one of
Yes.
the more unknown players in the 2024 draft, which, unless you're a real college basketball or NBA head, there were a lot of those. Number 6 overall pick, 3 of 5 from beyond the arc. I honestly didn't really know that was a part of his game. I'm not drafting him anywhere, maybe in a super deep league. I'm sure he'll go off the board late in our dynasty draft that we're doing, or our keeper league draft, excuse me, on Wednesday. Total unknown to me. Again, if you're in a league where you draft, let's say 150 players, he's not going to be selected. But I'll be interested to see how much they could get from him. One of those guys who could kind of go either way. Like there's not a massive path to opportunity for him, but with the type of player he is, with the type of body he has, like I feel like he could play 2 or 3 different spots.
Yeah, I think he can play like wing to big, depending on the lineup. Like if Mark Williams is going to miss time, I could see Salon maybe sneaking into some backup 5 minutes,
Yep.
depending on, I guess, Taj Gibson's availability. And no, I mean, the 3-point shot is not not really a strong point of his game, but I feel like his jumper looked a little bit better in this game than what I saw um even in preseason, or excuse me, in summer league.
Yeah.
Um for me, his main thing is just he moves so well for his size that I think he'll be able to just get some rebounds and some
Mhm.
easy dunks in the NBA off of pick and rolls, but it's nice he was out there hitting threes too.
I will mention real quickly, we are at the half in this Orlando New Orleans game. We're not going to give you like on the fly preseason opener takeaways for either of these teams, but Daniel Tice did get the start at center for New
Yeah.
Orleans, which matters. Yves Missy, has played 7 minutes off the bench in the first half. I mean, this is a team that I think we're just like waiting and waiting for, that trade tweet to come and, them to acquire a center. I don't know if that's going to happen in the next couple of weeks. So keep an eye on Tice, keep an eye on Missy, starting Zion at power forward. No Brandon Ingram in this game. And then, of course, no Trey Murphy, who's injured as well. Zion, by the way, was 16, 8, 3, and 2 steals in the first half. I don't have much from Milwaukee yesterday. They took on the Detroit Pistons. Watched the, most of the first half of that game live. Milwaukee came out firing early on. They were up 20-3 to open this game, put up 39 in the first quarter. After that, we didn't see a whole lot of Dame Lillard or Brook Lopez or Gary Trent. Trent, I think, actually picked up an injury in this game. Milwaukee's reserves kind of let go of the rope. They ended up losing this game somehow by 33, despite leading by 11 at the end of the first quarter. Anything on the Detroit side? I thought Jaden Ivey looked pretty good.
Ivy looked good. Was aggressive. I feel like I came away the most impressed by Marcus Sasser,
Yeah.
who I liked a lot last year and was just hoping he would get more minutes, and someone I think is a good dynasty option. He looked great. 12 points and 4 of 8 shooting, 9 assists, 0 turnovers, 2 steals. Pretty undersized, but a good defender, so he can rack up steals. And I do kind of wonder what the rotation is going to end up looking like. Because they bring in guys like Hardaway Jr. and Beasley, and
Yeah.
we talked about that before. At some point, like
Yep.
you need to have guys out there shooting threes. But Sasser really stuck out to me.
Yeah, great player at the college level. Showed some flashes for them last season as well. And again, I mean, who knows on the Detroit rotation, right? They did not have Asar Thompson. He's still working back from that blood clot issue, so kind of TBD
Yeah,
on his status. But yeah, not a whole lot else to take away from that. I mean, I still feel comfortable, with Jalen Duren, with Cade Cunningham. I don't know. Can we trust Detroit to not play Tim Hardaway too much? Can we trust them to not play Malik Beasley too much? Both of those guys, saw serious minutes. Hardaway actually started on the wing alongside Cunningham and Ivy yesterday. We'll see. There's a lot of intriguing players that I want to get a look at for this Pistons team. Ron Holland, by the way, led the Pistons with 26 minutes off the bench, 10 points, 6 rebounds, 5 assists, a steal, and a block for him. I would not be shocked if Ron Holland has some like deep points league value this year.
it's possible. I feel like I'm not as high on him as other people are. I worry that the lack of shots going to be a problem,
Yeah.
especially on this roster, and if he's competing with Asar Thompson for minutes. But yeah, I mean he got drafted for a reason. Like he's a pretty good,
Mhm.
like he could be a stat sheet stuffer type of guy.
Yeah. Yeah, he's definitely got some bad team, good stats vibes to him. Might need an injury or two, for that to truly come to fruition this season, but we'll see. One last team I want to hit is the Washington Wizards, because their
Yeah.
preseason rotation is probably the closest that we'll see to a regular season rotation. Got to hand it to Alex Sarr, man. 6 of
Yep.
8 shooting, 3 of 4 from beyond the arc, 15 points, 3 boards, 4 assists, and a block for Alex Sarr in 22 minutes in his NBA debut.
I thought his shot looked great. Wasn't hesitating. Form was nice. He was impacting the game a ton. You really notice that he has like real NBA
Mhm.
size and moves well, which is going to go a long way. And Jordan Poole came out and played pretty well too. Obviously a good sign for them.
Yeah, they did not have Malcolm Brogdon in this game, so I don't know, exactly what that starting five will look like. For what it's worth, they started Valanciunas, Kuzma, Sarr, Koulibaly, and Jordan Poole. Really any of, I guess Sarr, Poole, or Koulibaly could get knocked out if they want to start Malcolm Brogdon. I mean, it's also totally possible they could bring him off the bench. I don't know. I think it's possible Malcolm Brogdon might not be on this team for the entire season. That's kind of the one big linchpin for me with Washington. I've been drafting a bunch of Bub Carrington late in
Yep.
drafts. I think he'd be the guy that would really benefit if they were to move on at some point from Brogdon. Carrington, by the way, 1 of 8 from the field in 18 minutes. 0-4 from beyond the arc. Did get to the line 7 times, so we like that. And Koulibaly, 2 blocks, 2 steals in 24 minutes. So we won't bore you anymore by just running through, preseason box scores, but we got basketball back. It's exciting. We got to talk about it, and we'll continue to build a larger preseason sample over these next couple of weeks. But Alex, I want to get into some of the high risk, high reward players for this season. And our definition of risk reward certainly could vary. We have some license here to talk about whoever we want. I think this conversation has to start at the top, though, with Joel Embiid and Anthony Davis.
Yeah, they're going about. They actually have the same exact ADP right now on Yahoo, 7.7, same as Halliburton too. Personally, I'd rather have Halliburton. Has shown an ability to be a first round player. I think his stats were kind of muted by his injuries last year, but yeah, about Embiid and Davis. I mean, it's just I don't trust either of these guys to play more than 65 games. We've heard things out of Embiid's camp that the focus is going to be on the playoffs and there might be more rest and just fewer minutes in general. And then they bring in Paul George as like a better third option compared to Tobias Harris. And I mean, if you're shooting for upside, like it depends on how you want to draft. If you're shooting for pure upside, like, yeah, I mean, this is why these guys get drafted here. But if you're a little more risk averse, you might try something else depending on your league type.
Yeah, the thing with Embiid is he's been so dominant the last couple of years that like he has more leeway in terms of missed games than other even star players do. It's like he can miss. Yeah. I mean, what 2 years ago he missed 16 games, which that's a lot. 66 games, not ideal. He missed 16 games and he still finished as the number 2 overall player. And the year before that, he missed 14 games and still finished as the number 3 overall player. Last season, he missed more than half of the year and was still the 42nd overall player in 8 category roto league. So it really depends on one, your risk tolerance, and 2, just really how many games you think Embiid's going to miss. Like there is a baseline here. He's not going to play 70 games. We know that's not happening. Can he get to 65? Can he get to even like 62? Like if you're taking him with the 7th or 8th overall pick and he gives you MVP caliber production like he has the last couple of years and plays 62, 63 games, in a roundabout way, you're still getting your ROI there. I don't know. I'm with you. Like I tend to just play it safe there. I would take Tyrese Halliburton. I think about taking someone like Jason Tatum. Anthony Edwards goes just behind that range as well. It's a really, really difficult balance. But like you said, it depends on your risk tolerance. It depends on, kind of how your league is structured as well, right? It's like, are you shooting for the number 1 spot in your league? Or is this a league where you just want to finish in the top half, like the RotoWire Stake League?
Yeah, like in a best ball setting, guys like Embiid, like Anthony Davis, Zion are, it's way easier to stomach that. You don't have to deal with whether or not to put them in your roster or put them in your starting lineup or not. Like if you're in a week, like there are some leagues where it's like going to be a weekly lineup set and you don't have IR spots. There are enough leagues like that, and it's like that's where the value of these guys really takes a hit.
Yeah, no question about that. Next guy on my list, and I'll let you read off some of yours as well, Ja Morant. And there's some stark contrast in Morant's ADP across different host sites. So in Yahoo, he's going about pick 34, which to me sounds about right. As you'd expect, he goes quite a bit higher in Underdog Best Balls, 18.1. ESPN leagues, his ADP is 14.7.
I think I feel like in ESPN leagues, guys with high strong name value go higher. Yeah. And there's a lot of points leagues on ESPN. So I think that's probably why his ADP is so high. But you're right. I mean, I'm okay with getting him in the mid-30s in category settings. But, I still think he is a bit of an injury risk. Like if we're putting the personal absences aside, his style of play is probably going to lend him to some more injuries. And look, in certain category settings, he's not going to be like, because he's not a great defensive player. His 3-point percentage is kind of shaky, as is his free throw percentage. So in a roto league, that's probably where he's the least valuable. But if you're targeting assists, if you're targeting points, he's better there.
Yeah, and that's the thing with pretty much any risky, quote unquote, risky player in fantasy basketball, like contrasting it to fantasy football, you could justify it depending on your roster build, right? It's like in fantasy football, it's just, all right, what are the total points? And obviously that's more so what we're talking about in a points league for basketball. But in a roto league, yeah, you could justify Ja Morant if you're saying, well, look, I really want the assist here. But Yeah, in Roto, I'm not taking him, inside the top 25. Even in the low 30s, it still feels like a risk to me. And you mentioned obviously the personal absences have been the main story, but this is a guy who's been banged up every single year of his career, last 3 seasons. So we're talking post COVID. When we were dealing with shortened seasons, he's played 57, 61, and then 9 games a year ago. And even on a per game basis, like even at his absolute peak, he's been like on average the 37th or 38th best player per game in Roto League. So he's never really demonstrated that, it's not like a LaMelo Ball situation where it's like, man, if LaMelo stays healthy and plays even 68 games, I mean, he could be the 5th or 6th best player in fantasy. Like Morant has never really demonstrated that kind of statistical upside. And I think, the field goal percentage for a player of his style and his size is really good. I mean, he's been basically at about 47% if you couple up the last 2 years. The assists have been there. He's not a high steal player, hovering around 1 per game. He does give you some blocks as a point guard, which is nice, but not enough to really move the needle for me. It's the lack of 3-point volume is the number one thing. And he's really shown no improvement there. He started to take a few more last year. We're dealing with a 9-game sample, so who knows? But he only shot 27%, shot 30% from 3 the year before. And he's also not a great free throw shooter. He takes a ton of free throws. I mean, he's always gotten to the line 7-8 times a game over the last few years. And on aggregate, he's shooting about 77% from the line. Not disastrous, but it's still a minus for a guard.
Yeah, there are ways to make that up.
Sure.
I'm not going to. He's not like Giannis, where it's like there's these huge stats negatives, where it's like you got to work to get your free throw percentage back and your threes back and everything. But it's worth pointing out and sort of understanding. Like you may need to shore up some categories if you draft Morant in the 3rd or 4th round.
All right, I'll kick it to you in a moment to talk about some of your high risk, high reward players. But first, we got a quick message from our friends at DraftKings Pick 6. We're partnering up with DraftKings Pick 6 this season, and we count down the days until NBA opening night. I can assure you Pick 6 has plenty of NFL offerings for us. You think a certain quarterback will throw for more than 300 yards? How about your favorite receiver scoring a touchdown this week? Check out Pick 6, the newest way to play fantasy football and win cash with DraftKings. Here's how it works. Pick 2 to 6 players of the same sport and choose if they'll have more or less of a given stat. We're talking yards, catches, touchdowns, etc. Lock those picks in, compete against opponents for a shot at huge cash prizes. Download the new DraftKings Pick 6 app right now and use our code ROTOPICK. That's code ROTOPICK, ROTOPICK. New Pick 6 customers, you play $5 on your first entry, you get $50 in Pick 6 credits guaranteed. Again, that code is ROTOPICK. Play $5, get $50 in Pick 6 credits. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org in Connecticut. Must be 18 plus. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Pick 6 not available everywhere, including New York and Ontario. Void where prohibited. 1 per new customer. Bonus is awarded as non-withdrawable Pick 6 credits that expire in 30 days. Limited time offer. See the terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promos. All right. We want to thank our partners over at DraftKings Pick 6. Again, make sure you go check that out. If you need to hear the promo code again, just hit that 15-second back button if you're listening to this as a podcast and go check it out. We're having a lot of fun playing on Pick 6. All right, Alex, I have a few more names on my list, but I'm curious who you have on yours. High risk, high reward players this season.
James Harden.
Harden.
Yeah, if you're on ESPN right now, his ADP is 29. I actually don't even think you can qualify that as a risk drafting him at 29. I mean, depending on what your league setting is. But look, I think the potential is there for Harden to just he's 35. He averaged 17 points a game last year. Maybe with the new way the officiating is going in the NBA, they're not going to give him those foul calls anymore. All of those are factors. On the other hand, Kawhi's already hurt. Paul George is gone. Could this be a bounce back season for Harden? And if it is, last year was a massive down year for him, relatively speaking. I mean, just raw numbers. He averaged, 17 points, 8 assists. He's still ranked 25th. His final year in Philly, 21 points, 11 assists, ranked 11th. He just doesn't need to do that much more for him to start approaching first round value again. And he's not being drafted in the first round. But if you're at the turn, I think you can consider it. It's just, as these guys get older, the downside of the potential injury and rest days and stuff like that happens.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. I mean, he's going into his age 35 season. Harden has a pretty good track record of health for someone who's had as many, like, is this guy working out whatsoever over the summer question marks throughout his career? Like, he doesn't really miss that many games, even at his peak when he was, playing 30, 37, 38 minutes a night. He was never really missing time and played 72 games for the Clippers a year ago. But you're right. I mean, when anybody at age 35, you're going to become an increased health risk. For me, I think the reward is worth the risk with James Harden this season. I am significantly more worried about Kawhi. I'm not drafting Kawhi anywhere. I know the ADP is on some sites is at the point where it's kind of tough to avoid because of how good he is on a per game basis. And the Clippers, by virtue of owing their first round pick unprotected to OKC, I mean, they have motivation to, be as competitive as possible and get these guys out there for as many games as they can. I get that. I think, Harden's already talking about like, man, yeah, we just saw Luka Doncic lead a team to the finals playing like me. Like, I want to do that. Like, I think James Harden could be set for a monster year. I mean, you want to talk about a bad team, good stats season. I think the Clippers could win like 37 games, because I think Kawhi's going to miss 30 games, let's say. How many of those are they winning with basically just James Harden? Probably not that many. I think this team is basically built around James Harden. If you're taking Kawhi Leonard out for 35% of the year, like I think he will, I mean, that's a huge swath where James Harden is so clearly the guy that, and we know who James Harden is. He's fine getting his numbers. I mean, I think this could be a big time fantasy season for him. And again, I'm with you on the risk. I think there's some team context risk. There's some injury risk here. But I think given where Harden's being drafted, like, would you be shocked at all if he finished the year as like the 7th best fantasy player?
No, well, I was just about to kind of lob this back at you. You said you're not really worried about the risk, or you think he has a lot of upside. And we just talked about Embiid and Anthony Davis.
Yeah.
I'm going to set you up for a hot take. Like, if you have pick 10, Embiid, Anthony Davis, and James Harden are all on the board.
Yeah.
Are you thinking about Harden there?
I would think about it. I would think about Trae Young as well.
Yeah, me too.
I think you'd have to think about Steph Curry there. If you want to take Curry, Durant, I think they could be in this conversation just given the age and the missed time. Yeah, it's something I would consider. It really is. I mean, Harden, it seems crazy to say that I'm like, all in on jumping ADP for a 35-year-old on what could be a really bad team. But
well, I mean, I'm with you because another guy on my list is Steph Curry for very
all right. Well, let's go in on that
for similar reasons. Where it's just like, hey, you lose Klay Thompson. I'm high on Kuminga this year just because I think the leverage, like they just need him so badly to average 20 a game. And Curry, was like 21st to 8 cap per game last year, played 74 games, right? So had a good year on that front. But I think they just need him to go out there and just start firing. Like, to me, this year, despite Curry being 36 years old,
yeah,
I think this might be a situation where they're like, hey, we need you to score 30 because it's just not going to get done any other way. Like, I think he's going to have to be hyper aggressive.
Yeah.
And he clearly, I mean, obviously he's pretty recently been like a top 10 fantasy player, and his ADP right now, I should say, is 12 on Yahoo. So people are sort of, people are there, right? In theory.
Yeah.
I don't think people are taking him at like 7 over AD. I haven't seen that yet, but I think you have to think about it.
Yeah. The difference between Curry and Harden for me is that we've seen Curry break down when he's asked to carry teams, and Harden for whatever reason just hasn't. I do think I think Curry's gonna have a monster per game season. I just wonder, can the body hold up? And I don't like buying in on veterans coming off of like their best health season in a long time. And that's kind of what we're doing with Curry. 74 games last year. That was his most since 2016-17, which was the first year Kevin Durant showed up in Golden State. I mean, that feels like a lifetime ago. Like we've had like 3 cycles of the NBA since then. And, 56 games the year before, 64, 63, optimistically, I think you could say, all right, if he plays like 67, 68, that feels like a win, but that's still 15 missed games, man. And I don't know. I mean, I think the ADP for Curry is totally fair. And again, I think he could be a monster. I mean, I think this could be, especially the first couple months of the season when the Warriors are figuring things out. They're trying to be as competitive as they can. You're totally right. I mean, they don't really have any other options. Right. And I think Curry could take a big step forward in terms of scoring. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if he's up close to 29 points per game like he was 2 years ago. But, it's like, what is the assist potential at this point? His steals production has really fallen off over the last couple of years. Yeah, I think he's a perfect high risk, high reward candidate. I think based on ADP. Could you make the same case for Paul George in terms of a guy coming off of his best health season in a while? I think just about everything broke right for Paul George fantasy wise last year. I mean, he's somebody who had missed just as much, if not more time than Kawhi Leonard over the previous 4 or 5 years. After playing 48, 54, 31, 56 games, he jumps up to 74 games played last season. Obviously a change of scenery as well. And another guy who we're seeing, pretty dramatic differences is in ADP. In Underdog, he's going about pick 40. In the ESPN leagues, he's going about pick 44. And then in Yahoo, he's going at pick 28. I'm much more comfortable taking him in the 40s than I am early round 3.
I'd be pretty happy getting him in the 40s because he's proven to be a top 20 type fantasy player over the past half decade, even if he hasn't been healthy. Just like we know he's got that kind of skill. His numbers translate really well to fantasy. I would expect him to have roughly the same role as he did in with the Clippers, sort of like a second/third option. And we know he's good defensive numbers as well.
Yeah.
Like he's going to be active when he's on the court. Like if he's not playing a ton of offense, he's going to be way more active on defense. Like he's shown that ability. I think I would consider drafting him at like 28 to 30, depending on my build and the league and stuff like that. Yeah, because there are going to be situations where you do draft him there and maybe he does rank 17th per game and plays 70 games and it's a win. But, like you said, very little history of that besides this one sort of outlier year recently.
Yeah, and another guy who's in his mid-30s, going to be his age 34 season. He's the guy that I feel like that the pressure is going to be on Paul George to fit in with the Sixers, right? Not necessarily the Sixers fitting him in. It's like we know what Embiid is. We know what Tyrese Maxey is. I think those guys are the 1 and 2. And Embiid can certainly rival Tyrese Maxey for that number 2 role. No question about it. I think that's closer to a 1A, 1B type of thing. I think an argument in favor of Paul George is, much like with the Clippers, how many games are you saying, all right, well, now all of a sudden he's the number 1 or number 2 option because Joel Embiid's not out there?
Yeah, that's sort of the debate you have to get into with like a lot of these teams. And so like if you like if you think that Embiid is going to get hurt, or you think that Curry's going to get hurt, and you don't trust these guys to play 60, 65 games, you sort of have to do the flow chart where it's like, well, if he's hurt, then who's the next guy up?
Right.
And you can sort of draft based off of that when you're shooting for upside.
Torrey Thompson in the comments says he got Kawhi late in the 5th round. He said he had tried to avoid it, but I couldn't pass him up there. I mean, late in the 5th round, that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because at that point, you're talking about guys who, you're in like the Gobert, Jamal Murray, Jared Allen range or something. And it's like, at that point, I'm taking Kawhi as well.
Yeah. All right. Anybody else that you want to hit on your list before we get into our boring veterans to target?
Not really. Partially because to me, a lot of the higher risk, high reward guys are to some extent, these older veterans who are kind of injury prone. Yeah. And I think that's where a lot of your risk lies.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. And it's, we could have this exact same conversation about Kevin Durant and LeBron James if we really wanted to. It's just, there's not a whole lot of insight to offer other than they could get hurt or they might not get hurt as much as we think. And, I think we all understand those risks with the big name guys. All right, well, let's talk about some boring veterans then. I have just a, really gross list of guys who I'm targeting this season. And I'm not proud of it, but players who I think will, at the very least, return volume. This conversation, Alex, for me, always starts with CJ McCollum, who you could get in the early 80s to late 80s, depending on where your draft is taking place. His ADP is somewhere in the 80s across the board. And I would encourage you to check out our ADP comparison page at RotoWire. You can see the composite. You can see ESPN, CBS, Yahoo, Underdog, Fantrax. Really important to kind of get a gauge before you go into any draft. CJ McCollum just continues to be wildly consistent every single year. Going into his age 33 season, feels like he should be older than that. Like Paul George doesn't feel older than CJ McCollum to me, but he is. CJ McCollum, total value finishes in 8-cat leagues, essentially over the last decade here. 51, 40, 69, 92, 38, 70, 32, 20, 27. Even when this guy misses games, he still finds a way to just be really productive. He missed 16 games a year ago and, was still essentially a top 50 value. His per game numbers back that up as well. Like he's been mostly healthy. He's not one of these 80 game per season type of guys. He usually misses a little bit of time, but he's always somewhere between like 40 and 60 in terms of per game value. Total value kind of vacillates based on the missed games, but I think the general consensus is like, McCollum's kind of lost a step, and maybe that is true as he, gets into his mid 30s. But if I could get him with like the 88th pick in a draft, I'm clicking that every time.
100%. And, maybe his usage falls a little bit with DeJounte Murray coming in, but he's also not playing his more natural position at shooting guard.
Yeah.
And so I think, maybe he could be a little more efficient. And I don't know if his points really fall off. And you're right. I mean, that's the thing about not just McCollum. We can use him as an example, but like there are a good chunk in like the 80-ish range of guys who are scoring like basically 20 points a game.
Yeah.
And so you don't have to get points that early in drafts. You can focus on a lot of your other categories. If you're playing in a category setting, whether it's roto or head to head, you can focus on your assists and your rebounds, what have you. Because late, there are a million guards who are scoring between like 17 to 21 points per game. They're just available in picks like 80 to 120.
Yep. Rudy Gobert is on my list as well. And I don't feel
Sure.
quite as good about it this year because you're not getting the ridiculous discount that you were a year ago. I mean, he was going in the early 80s in some drafts that I was doing. Like his ESPN ADP settled at 78. He was going a little bit higher in CBS and Yahoo. That is now reversed. I mean, in Yahoo, his ADP is at 46. He's at about 50 in ESPN, 55 in Underdog. So we've had a bit of a reversal for Gobert, who will be 32 this season. The way I would phrase this to you first and foremost is, does the cat trade impact anything for Gobert? Like, does this really matter for him fantasy wise?
I'm not putting a lot of stock into it. It's just not a lot. I mean, I think I don't know how much potential there is for like him to get even more rebounds. Like Randall's going to run in there and get his fair share. And I do think their spacing's kind of messed up because I don't know how much I trust Randall as a 3-point shooter. So maybe that makes Gobert's life a little bit tougher. But I'm not like really factoring it in. Like this is a huge thing and I got to drop Gobert 20 spots or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, this year it's like if you draft him at, I don't know, 45 and he finishes 45, like I'm okay with that. Like I wouldn't expect him to vastly outperform the ADP. Whereas last year I thought that was just an obvious buying opportunity. Whereas he could finish 2 or 3 rounds ahead of that.
And one thing we talk about, maybe we don't talk about it enough, is just like when you get into these mid rounds, the difference between the 45th best fantasy player and the 70th best fantasy player is not that big. It's not the same as like the difference between the 5th best fantasy player and the 25th best fantasy player. That's a mile, compared to 45 and 75. So even if you're like, I don't know, what if Gobert is like the 70th ranked player and I draft him 45? It's not really why you're losing your league. There's a lot else that would go wrong for you to lose your league or not win your league with upside plays late.
All right. What other boring veterans have you found yourself targeting? You've probably done more drafts than I have.
It's weird to consider this guy a vet, but like Bam Adebayo, 27 years old, has basically been in this very similar role for a half decade. Always ranks between, I don't know, 20 and 40 per game. It's just like one of the most rock solid centers in the NBA. You know exactly what you're getting. Yes, his blocks numbers aren't as high as you want him to be, but he's averaging 20, 10, and 3 to 5 assists per game. Always an efficient shooter. Maybe he shoots some threes this year, but either way, he's not killing your free throw percentage. Like if Adebayo's sitting there for me in the 3rd round, I'm extremely happy just to take him. Like I'm like, there's a 0% chance this burns me.
Yeah, hard to push back on any of that. And, I think we've had to do somewhat of a reassessment on Bam, and I still don't even think of him as a veteran. I mean, he's 27, but obviously he's been in the league for like, this will be his 8th season already. I think 3 or 4 years ago, like that year that Miami made the run to the bubble title, you're looking at Bam and being like, man, what could this guy be? Right. I mean, he was averaging like over 5 assists per game that year. You're still wondering if there was an expansion in shooting range coming at some point. Like, could he be a guy that gives you a 3 per game? like his game hasn't really developed at all. He's just kind of been the same guy, but that's still a really high level player, right? I mean, that's like a borderline third team all NBA guy. He has missed a total of like 18 games over the last 2 years, which is huge. Even though he has not improved as a 3-point shooter, he has gotten better at the line. I mean, he's, up close to 80% over the last 2 seasons. So we'd like to see that as well. Yeah, not much pushback for me on Bam Adebayo, who still, it doesn't feel like you're getting like a massive discount on him, but I think when you compare him to some of the guys who go in that same range, who have, significantly riskier either situations, like Lauri Markkanen has like the same ADP. Love Lauri Markkanen, don't love the situation in Utah. And there's a bunch of players who go in that range who have significantly worse track records of health too.
Right. And I think it's pretty important to make sure you get a center within your first 4 rounds. Otherwise, you're just scrambling, or you get stuck in the center run around pick 80 to 90. And
Clint Capella.
Especially like exactly. Capella. If you're in Yahoo, default, it's 2 centers.
Yeah.
So, grabbing Adebayo early when you just know exactly what you're getting, it makes your life easy.
All right. Who else you got?
Even though I think there are some questions about what's going to happen with this guy this year, DeMar DeRozan, just if he's there for me at 55, 60, which he is in Yahoo, sure. Why not? Because I think his floor is only so low. Like, you're bringing him in to be at worst your number 3 option. And, like, what's a worst case scenario for him? Like 18 points, 4 assists on efficient shooting. Maybe even more efficient shooting, because he's not going to be forcing up as many looks this year on a bad team. So, and he's been pretty healthy. Obviously, his for almost his entire career, he's been healthy. I just think you can't really go wrong in like that mid 50s range for DeRozan.
Yeah, I think the change of scenery is the only big question, and his game is so translatable, right? I mean, he's played for 3 different franchises. Sometimes they've been competitive, sometimes they've not been competitive, and the numbers have either sustained or, in some cases, even improved over these last couple of years in Chicago. I mean, he's been basically a 50% from the field guy for the last 5 years. Like you said, almost never misses time. Not somebody you really have to worry about from that perspective whatsoever. Elite free throw shooter too in roto leagues, which definitely matters. High volume and always in the mid to upper 80s, if not, creeping up on the 90s, which is massive. It helps offset the fact that he, doesn't really take threes. I mean, he was at a career high 0.9 made threes per game last year. I mean, maybe that's something that he develops late in his career, right? It's like that. Maybe if you lop off, let's say 4 to 5 points per game, but he's hitting 1.5 threes per game, that in some ways tries to make up for it.
I could see both him and Sabonis taking career highs in threes this year.
Yeah.
Is it going to be like massive? No, I don't think so. But I think just the spacing for the spacing, it may be a little more necessary than in years past.
I don't want to talk about this player, but I think we do need to give an obligatory mention to Nikola Vucevic.
Okay, yeah.
He's the quintessential boring veteran. It's like with him, you're always just waiting for the fall off. It's like, all right, is this the year that they discover that he's actually not productive at all when it comes to winning? It's never happened. He's gone his entire career without a team realizing that. I think Chicago, they're going down the same road again as last year. They're not going to be an overly competitive team. They don't really have any other options at center. Again, Vucevic is going to be 34. So maybe there's some increased injury risk, but he's Nikola Vucevic. He's in all likelihood going to do what he's done for the last decade. Ivica Zubac is another one for me as well. Always love getting Zubac. Like, you talk about if you go a little too guard or wing heavy early in the draft, and you hate being in that position where you're like, oh my God, I'm taking Clint Capella, or, you need to get that last center that you're like, I really wish I didn't have to start this guy every week. Zubac is always the fail-safe for me if I need a late center. And, I mean, he's just been wildly consistent. You don't expect big things whatsoever. He'll just give you the 11 points, 9 rebounds, 1.5 assists, hopefully give you close to a block and a half. He's a good free throw shooter for a true big man, and he's going to shoot 65% from the field. So to me, kind of the definition of a boring veteran.
He is. And, I think with Paul George going, if this does end up being quote unquote entirely Harden's team, we know how much Harden loves to pick and roll. He's going to give Zubac a million wide open dunks for the high field goal percentage. And I do think they may run a little bit more through Zubac. I don't think it's going to be like a 3-4 assists per game type situation, but he's got a great hook shot. He's shown an ability, like when they need him to score, it's like
Yes.
he can get out there and hit some hook shots, right? So yeah, I think this is a really strong year to target him. And I don't want to say like be hyper aggressive, but like if he's there at 90 and it's like, sure, 85, maybe even do it.
Yeah.
Cause it's again, the floor is super high. Maybe there is a little more upside than in years
Yeah.
past.
What they also don't really have a backup center right now. Like
Yeah.
in every other season, there's always been like a Mason Plumlee type or like Daniel Tice or whoever, where it's like, all right, I guess we got to give this guy some minutes. I mean, right now it's Mo Bamba and like PJ Tucker is technically a center, but he's stepping away from the team and probably won't play a game for the Clippers this year. Like, I think there is, as boring as Zubac is and as low upside as I think he ultimately probably is. He only played 26 minutes a game last year. It's like, would it be crazy if he played, I don't know, 29 minutes per game, 30 minutes per game? Like, I think that's on the table.
I think it is. I'm completely with you.
All right. Anybody else you want to hit?
I just got one more guy,
Okay.
Fred VanVleet. I do think that they might experiment more with Amon Thompson and Reed Shepherd. Maybe he looks really good, and maybe this is the year that Fred VanVleet stops playing 36 minutes a game. But I think even if he, is playing minutes more in the low 30s, that we just know he never turns the ball over. He hits a ton of threes, one of the best passers in the NBA. And again, just someone with a really high floor that always gets underdrafted every single season. And right now, his ADP on Yahoo is 39. I just don't think you can get burned by that.
Yeah, no, I think you're right about that. Houston is just kind of a confounding team to me for a lot of reasons. I've had to, wrestle with how comfortable am I drafting guys like Jalen Green, Jabari Smith, even Reed Shepherd to a degree, who's basically free, but, just trying to map out the path to minutes for most of this team. But the two guys I'm not worried about are Şengün and VanVleet. Like, I think
Right.
Houston wants to win, much like last year. They want to win as many games as they can. Like, as much as they'd like to develop some of these young players, I think winning is still the priority. And, for a coach like Udoka, that means we're going to see a ton of Fred VanVleet. So I think that's a good call. That's not somebody I had on my list. All right, we'll answer a quick question here before we get out from Skeeter 221. This is total opposite of a boring veteran. Taylor Hendricks or Noah Clowney? This is a Barutha question right here. Hendricks or Clowney?
Oh man. Well, I think Clowney I actually think has less of a barrier to minutes.
Yeah.
Like Dorian Finney-Smith is still there, but it's like how much? I mean, come on. Like I feel like he's going to be gone by the All-Star break.
Oh, yeah.
So I think Clowney has more minutes upside like immediately. I would like to see. I'm sort of dodging this, but I would like to see like some Nets preseason games and like see if Clowney's actually like in there doing stuff before I sort of like recommend one over the other. But I think there's plenty of reason to take a shot with either one at the end of your draft.
Well, you're in luck because the Nets play their first preseason game tomorrow night against the LA Clippers. So we'll have to be keeping a close eye on that one. I like what I've seen from Clowney. I think I think there's a little bit more upside there. Like if it's the last pick in your draft and you're like, all right, I'm just looking for a lottery ticket, I would go Clowney. I think Hendricks might be more like game to game sustainable. There's a chance he starts at the 4 this year, like a pretty decent chance. Yeah. And I think that's, something that they'll explore, but they were also like weirdly hesitant. It felt like to play him extended minutes until the very end last season. Like even with injuries, even when they were like kind of non-competitive early in the season, like he was just picking up a bunch of DNP CDs. But somebody who was wildly productive at the college level, last 15 games of last season, Taylor Hendricks gave you 9 points, 5.5 rebounds, 1 assist, 1.8 combined steals and blocks. He is a very good shot blocker for his size, and almost 2 threes per game at about a 42% clip. So, again, if you're looking for a relative floor out of like the 160th pick, I would go Hendricks. If you're shooting for the stars, go with Noah Clowney. All right, we just had one more question come in from Paul. Would you go with AD or Giannis with the 6th pick? And which second rounder would you pair with them?
I would go Giannis. I'm just less worried about injuries. And I think if you are playing, and I assume if you're asking me who to pair them with, you're talking about like a head-to-head category situation. Yeah. Who would I pair him with in the second? You could either try to lean into it, which I think is completely fine, and just do punt free throws and punt threes and just draft Sabonis. You know, like draft Sabonis in the second round or Scotty Barnes or something like that. And if you're doing roto and you're trying to sort of counter the fact that his free throws are bad and you're trying to get that back, you know, look at someone. I don't think Durant would be there for you, but even someone like James Harden, Devin Booker, even Lillard would not even be like a horrible option to pair with, because if one gets hurt, the other one could see more minutes.
Yeah, I think it's probably easier to do the risk mitigation strategy with Giannis, because there are, like, you know, we're talking about guys going off the board at like pick 17, 18. There's a ton of elite players on the board and guys who are going in that range for a reason. So I think it's easier to say, oh, you know, if Kevin Durant is sitting there, or Donovan Mitchell is sitting there, or James Harden or Devin Booker, it's like, yeah, those guys, you know, kind of make up for some of what you're losing with Giannis. And yeah, if you want to go into the kind of punt side of it, then your options are a bit more limited. I'm with you as far as, you know, Giannis being the better health bet for sure. It just it depends how you want to structure your team, right? Because I mean, AD is a significantly better shot blocker than Giannis is at this point. Like Giannis, it feels like has like more highlight blocks than anybody, but like the shot blocking volume has not been all that good.
No. And so like, yeah, I mean, again, if I'm in head-to-head categories, I want to punt, most likely. So yeah, I would, if I could get Sabonis or I could get Scotty Barnes, and you just shore yourself up with like these just really big playmakers, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're mitigating the issue of the free throw percentage and the lack of threes.
All right, our time is up. Good stuff as always, Alex. We'll be doing this episode every Monday through the entire NBA season. So make sure you bookmark that. Make sure you subscribe to the RotoWire YouTube channel if that's where you're watching us. Really appreciate that. Give this video a like, by the way, please, if you're enjoying it. We'll be bringing you 4 episodes every single week of the season. I'll be back with Brandon Kravitz tomorrow. We'll have Mike Barner and Kieran Sprecher on Wednesday. Alex, Ken Kreitz, and Shannon McCune each Friday. They'll be talking waiver wire once we get to the season. But again, go check us out wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us on Spotify. You can find us on Apple Podcasts. If you want to watch your podcast, go check us out on the RotoWire Fantasy Basketball YouTube channel. We also want to thank DraftKings Pick 6, the presenting sponsor of this podcast. Again, really having a great time playing on Pick 6 and looking forward to ramping that up quite a bit once the NBA season rolls around. Alex, enjoy the rest of your week, man. We'll talk soon.